Scholars in 1,000 universes have theorized about what lies beyond the boundaries of their reality. Priests have prayed to the edges of existence. Scientists have mapped the seams between dimensions. Sorcerers have pressed their palms against the membrane separating one cosmos from another and felt something press back. But theory and prayer and careful experimentation all share one fatal assumption: that crossing those boundaries is a matter of choice. Victor Von Doom did not choose this. The time platform had been recalibrated 17 times. The dimensional equations were flawless. Doom had checked them personally, which meant they were beyond flawless, because no mind in his universe matched his in the marriage of sorcery and science. The experiment was meant to probe the resonance frequency of a beyond or adjacent energy signature his instruments had detected bleeding through from somewhere that had no business existing. A controlled probe, a measured inquiry, the kind of experiment that lesser minds called impossible and Doom called Tuesday. The platform fired, and then something on the other side pulled, not pushed, pulled, with the purposeful hunger of a system that had been waiting for exactly the right frequency to lock onto. Something ancient and mechanical and vast had recognized the energy signature of Doom's probe and reached across the dimensional barrier with the casual authority of a system that had been built to do precisely this. In the half-second between activation and arrival, Victor Von Doom experienced something he had not felt since he was a scarred student at State University, watching his dimensional portal explode and take his face with it. Surprise. Then the platform shattered. Dimensional fire roared through the laboratory beneath Latverian Castle, and Dr. Doom fell through the seam between universes like a stone dropped into still water. He arrived screaming through the upper atmosphere of a ring. Not a planet, a ring, a structure of impossible scale. A band of land and metal and contained atmosphere curving away in both directions until it vanished into its own horizon. Its inner surface alive with continents and oceans and cloud systems rotating in the engineered gravity of something that had no right to exist and yet existed with the serene confidence of the genuinely ancient. 10,000 kilometers in diameter. The math assembled itself in Doom's mind in the first 3 seconds of freefall, his armor's sensors shrieking with telemetry as he plummeted through cloud cover at terminal velocity. The ring's engineered atmosphere tearing at the green cloak that whipped behind him like a battle standard. Doom fired his boot jets at 4,000 meters. The ground rushed up, dark alien forest, towering trees with silver-gray bark and bioluminescent lichen tracing their roots. The air thick with the smell of ozone and something organic and old. He hit the earth in a crater of displaced soil and shattered undergrowth. The Doom armor absorbing the impact with the mechanical indifference of a system built to survive re-entry from orbit. Servos cycled. Diagnostic routines completed in 0.3 seconds. Hull integrity, 100%. Power systems, nominal. Weapons, fully charged. Doom stood. He looked up through the canopy of alien trees at the impossible curve of the ring overhead, at the star hanging at its center like a captive sun, at the distant glint of orbital structures that his sensors were already trying to classify and failing, because nothing in his universe's database matched their geometry. Forerunner architecture, his mind would later name it. But in this first moment, standing in alien soil with shattered dimensional energy still crackling across his armor's surface, Victor Von Doom simply looked at the ring and understood two things simultaneously. He was not in his universe, and whoever had built this structure was worth knowing. The forest was not quiet. 3 kilometers to the northwest, something was burning. His thermal sensors painted the signature of vehicle-grade weapons fire. the specific heat bloom of plasma discharge meeting military-grade titanium alloy. To the southeast, a larger engagement, heavier ordnance, the seismic signature of something that massed in the hundreds of tons moving at speed. And directly above, punching through the ring's artificial atmosphere on a trajectory that would bring it overhead in approximately 4 minutes, a vessel of human manufacture. He could tell by the design philosophy, the graceless utilitarian geometry of a species that built ships to survive rather than to inspire, was descending in what his systems classified as a controlled crash sequence. Doom reached inward for his sorcery. It was there. Of course it was there. The Vishanti did not abandon their reluctant servant simply because he had crossed a dimensional boundary. But the draw was wrong. In his universe, mystic energy moved through him like current through a superconductor, the ambient magical infrastructure of a universe soaked in sorcerous history, feeding his power as naturally as breathing. Here, reaching for that same current felt like reaching into a room where the lights had been removed. The power was his, stored in him, but the universe around him offered nothing in return. Every spell he cast here would come from his own reserves, and his reserves, vast as they were finite. He noted this, filed it, did not panic. Doom did not panic. What he did was turn toward the sound of the nearest firefight, because information required proximity, and Victor Von Doom had not survived every catastrophe his universe had thrown at him by standing still in alien forests, wondering what had gone wrong. He had survived by moving toward the danger and making it regret his arrival. The trees parted around him as his repulsors lifted him 3 meters off the ground, and he accelerated northwest through silver-barked alien forest toward the burning, toward the plasma fire, toward the war that he did not yet understand, but would, shortly, begin to shape. Behind him, in the crater of his arrival, the soil still smoldered with dimensional residue, energy that had no place in this universe's physics. The fingerprint of a man from somewhere else entirely. Something deep beneath the ring's surface registered the anomaly. Ancient sensors, dormant for 100,000 years, twitched toward awareness. The ring had noticed him. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. The Marines of the UNSC Pillar of Autumn had survived the slipspace jump. They had survived the Covenant pursuit that had chased them across half the galaxy. They had survived the controlled chaos of emergency deployment pods, raining down on a structure that their instruments couldn't fully map, and their commanding officers couldn't fully explain. Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson had survived considerably worse than any of this, which was why, when the tree line to the east of Alpha Base erupted in the blue-white glow of repulsor engines, and something in green and gold armor descended from the canopy like a mechanized god, his first instinct was not to run. His first instinct was to put his MA-5B assault rifle directly between himself and the thing, click the safety off, and say, with the particular calm of a man who had stopped being surprised by the universe approximately 15 years ago. Contact. East tree line. Single bogey. Not Covenant. The Marines around him raised their weapons. 12 rifles, 2 sniper positions, 1 rocket trooper with a tracking lock already established. Not enough. None of them knew that yet. But the math was simple for anyone willing to do it. The figure that emerged from the trees wore armor that their targeting systems couldn't penetrate, moved with the unhurried confidence of something that had already calculated their threat level and found it insufficient, and carried no weapon they could identify because, as Victor Von Doom understood better than anyone alive in any universe, he was the weapon. The Doom surveyed the human military encampment with the comprehensive efficiency of a man who had invaded small nations before breakfast. Prefabricated fortifications, good instincts, poor execution. Perimeter spacing left 3 exploitable gaps. The heavy weapons emplacement on the northern ridge had a blind spot at 40 degrees. The soldiers themselves were well disciplined, clearly veterans, operating on adrenaline and training in the absence of clear command structure. Their equipment was primitive by his standards. Kinetic projectile weapons, basic energy shielding on the vehicles, no powered armor except there. To the left of the central structure, 7 feet of olive green Mjolnir armor standing absolutely still, watching him with the focused attention of something that had learned stillness as a combat technique. The neural interface running through that armor was sophisticated. His sensors could detect the AI signatures cycling through its processing cores. The soldier inside it had reaction times and physical augmentation that placed him well outside normal human parameters. Interesting. "You are UNSC," Doom said. It was not a question. His armor had processed their insignia, cross-referenced the design language of their equipment, assembled a preliminary profile of their military culture from the behavioral patterns of the soldiers in front of him. All in the time it took him to speak the 4 words. "You are at war with the Covenant. You are losing." Johnson lowered his rifle approximately 2 degrees. Not surrender, just reassessment. "You got a name, Tin Man?" "I am Doom." A pause, measured for effect. Because Victor von Doom understood the psychology of first impressions better than most diplomats understood their entire field. "You may address me as Dr. Doom or as Lord Doom, or you may not address me at all. I will find all 3 options acceptable." The Spartan moved, not aggressively, a lateral step, repositioning, placing itself between Doom and the largest cluster of Marines, with the automatic protectiveness of a system designed around keeping human beings alive. The AI in its armor was running assessments. Doom could tell. The slight variations in the Spartan's positioning spoke of real-time tactical computation, adjustments being fed through the neural link faster than conscious thought. "Cortana," the Spartan said quietly. Not to Doom, to the AI. "What are we looking at?" The response would have been subsonic. He fed directly through the neural interface. But Doom's sensors caught the electromagnetic signature of the transmission, and his systems decoded enough to extract the shape of the assessment. Unknown technology, unknown origin, power signature unlike anything in UNSC or Covenant databases. Recommend extreme caution. Good AI. Honest assessment. "Your artificial intelligence is correct to recommend caution," Doom said, because letting them know he had intercepted the transmission cost him nothing and established something important: that their communications were not private from him. "I am not Covenant. I am not a threat to your people, provided your people demonstrate sufficient intelligence to avoid making themselves one to me." He turned his masked face toward the Spartan directly. "You are the anomaly they call Master Chief." A beat, and then, "And you're the anomaly that just fell out of the sky in the middle of a combat zone." Doom almost smiled behind the mask. Almost. Accurate. What followed was not trust. Trust was a currency Doom neither offered nor accepted from strangers. But it was the functional approximation of it that military necessity sometimes demanded. Johnson, demonstrating the pragmatic intelligence that separated surviving soldiers from dead ones, made the calculation quickly. Unknown powerful entity, clearly not Covenant, currently not shooting at them. In a combat zone with plasma fire raining from orbit and a ring the size of a small planet beneath their boots, not shooting at them was a meaningful endorsement. He got Doom talking. And Doom, who wanted information far more than he wanted these humans' admiration, allowed it, until the picture assembled itself in pieces. The Halo Ring, Installation 04, the UNSC had taken to calling it, was a forerunner construct of extraordinary age and unclear purpose. The Covenant considered it sacred, a holy artifact connected to something they called the Great Journey, a religious framework built around achieving transcendence through alien technology they had inherited without fully understanding. The UNSC had followed a Covenant fleet here after a catastrophic engagement at a human colony world. And Captain Keyes of the Pillar of Autumn had made the decision to bring the fight to the ring rather than lead the Covenant back to Earth. "The Forerunners," Doom said, and the words sat in his mouth with the particular weight of something that mattered. "Tell me everything you know about them." Johnson and the Chief exchanged a look. The sergeant shrugged. "Ancient alien species. Built this ring and others like it. Disappeared about 100,000 years ago, left behind tech that makes everything we've got look like stone knives." "How many rings?" Another exchange. "We don't know exactly. More than one." Doom was quiet for 4 seconds, which for a mind operating at his speed was the equivalent of a very long walk. A network of rings, ancient beyond reckoning. Technology so advanced, it registered as incomprehensible to 2 separate spacefaring civilizations, built by a species that had simply vanished. He thought about the pull that had dragged him through dimensional boundaries, the ancient sensors his instruments had detected stirring beneath the ring's surface when he arrived. The purposeful, hungry precision of whatever had reached across universes and grabbed his dimensional probe like a hand closing around a thrown object. The Forerunners had not simply built weapons. They had built something that was still watching. "There is a control room on this ring," Doom said. It was not a question this time either. "Take me to it." The Chief's helmet turned toward him with the slow deliberateness of a man choosing his next words very carefully. "We don't know where it is yet. Then we will find it." Doom's repulsors hummed as he rose slightly off the ground, armor catching the ring's artificial light. "And when we do, I will determine the ring's true function, which I suspect neither your military nor the Covenant's theology has accurately assessed." Above them, through the canopy of alien trees, a Covenant spirit dropship swept overhead, its anti-gravity drive painting a low thrum across the forest. Plasma searchlights swept the ground in long, systematic arcs. They were being hunted. Doom watched the dropship pass without moving, his force field already cycling to full power, and considered that the Covenant had just made a profound strategic error. They didn't know he was here yet. That advantage, like all advantages, had an expiration date. He intended to use every second of it. The Covenant's theological framework had survived intact for 10,000 years. It had weathered schisms and heresies and the occasional prophet who interpreted the sacred texts inconveniently. It had absorbed the shock of discovering humanity, a species the Covenant's own records suggested should not exist, and processed that discovery through the reliable machinery of religious doctrine, emerging with the clean and satisfying conclusion that humanity was an affront to the gods and should be destroyed. The Covenant was, in the particular way of all institutions built on absolute certainty, extremely good at incorporating new information into existing belief structures without disturbing the belief structures themselves. Dr. Doom was about to give them something they couldn't incorporate. The ambush came 3 kilometers northeast of Alpha Base, in a clearing where the ring's engineered forest gave way to a shelf of Forerunner metal. A surface panel the size of a football field, its geometry too precise for nature. Its alloy registering on Doom's sensors as something his universe had no classification for. The Chief had gone ahead to scout, moving through the trees with the particular silence of a 7-foot super soldier who had learned that stealth was not about size, but about patience. Johnson and 4 Marines held a perimeter 40 meters back. Doom walked the Forerunner panel's surface alone because he did not require escort and found the suggestion mildly offensive. He was running a full sensor sweep of the panel's substructure. The readings were extraordinary, the energy conduits running hundreds of meters beneath the surface. Data pathways of a complexity that made Stark's arc reactor technology look like a child's science project. When the Covenant arrived, 2 Phantom dropships, 12 elites in combat harness, the deep purple blue of their energy shields already active, plasma rifles and fuel rod guns distributed with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had been killing humans for 27 years and found it unremarkable. 4 hunters, paired as always, their assault cannon arms cycling to operational temperature with a sound like grinding continental plates. And behind them, stepping from the second Phantom with the measured authority of something that outranked everyone else present, a special operations elite in black harness, an Ultra, his mandibles set in the particular configuration that Cortana's behavioral analysis would later describe as ritualistic focus. They saw the Marines. They saw Doom. The Ultra raised one hand, and the entire Covenant force stopped moving. In 27 years of war against humanity, the Covenant had developed comprehensive threat assessment protocols. Humans looked a certain way, moved a certain way, smelled a certain way. The Covenant's olfactory senses were considerably more sophisticated than humanity understood. And human fear had a scent that Covenant warriors had learned to recognize and, in many cases, enjoy. The Marines smelled of fear, of adrenaline, of the particular biochemical cocktail that accompanied species-level conflict. The armored figure standing alone on the Forerunner panel smelled of ozone and something burning at the edge of perception, and did not smell afraid at all. The Ultra's name, in the translated approximation that human linguistics could approximate, was Fal Chavami, and he had served the Covenant for 60 years, had fought on 40 worlds, had personally overseen the glassing of 3 human colonies with the serene conviction of a being who understood his place in the divine order of the universe. He was not a being easily unsettled. He was unsettled now. The armored figure had not raised a weapon, had not moved to cover, had not demonstrated any of the behavioral markers that 60 years of combat had taught Fal to read as the precursors to either fight or flight. It simply stood on the sacred metal of the Forerunner panel and watched the Covenant force with the relaxed attention of something that was deciding, at its own pace, what to do next. "Identify yourself," Fal said through his translator, and the words emerged in both Sangheili and English, because Special Operations elites were thorough. "By the sacred rings, identify yourself, creature, or be destroyed." Doom let the threat settle in the air between them for a moment, not from hesitation, but because he had learned long ago that the pause before a response carried more information than the response itself. Then he said, in a voice amplified by his armor's external speakers to a register that vibrated in the chest, "I have been called many things: sorcerer, conqueror, king. In your language, and the closest approximation would be the one who does not answer to you." The plasma rifles came up. The hunters' assault cannons reached full charge, the green glow of superheated plasma painting Doom's armor in sickly light. Doom raised one hand, not in surrender. In the specific, precise gesture that preceded a force field expansion, a habit so deeply embedded in his combat routine that it had become unconscious, the way a master swordsman's hand finds the hilt before the mind registers the threat. The force field expanded outward in a 3-meter sphere, visible as a slight distortion in the air around him, like heat shimmer with geometry. Fal Chavami's mandibles spread wide, because he recognized the geometry, not the technology, Nothing in Covenant archives matched this specific energy signature. But the principle, a field, a barrier. Forerunner containment systems used similar principles, and the Covenant's Lekgolo, the Hunter's component worms, used bioelectrical barriers in their bonded forms. The Ultra's theological mind immediately began constructing a framework for what he was seeing. Forerunner. The word formed in Fal's mind with the weight of religious revelation. Not human, not Covenant. Something the gods left behind. He held up his fist again. The plasma rifles lowered, not fully, but enough. The Hunter's cannons remained hot, because Hunters operated on different decision trees than elites and were not susceptible to theological reconsideration in the field. "You stand on sacred ground," Fal said, his translator cycling to what the Covenant called the formal register, language reserved for speaking to the divine. "Are you a reclaimer? A construct of the Forerunners? Speak truly, for the gods hear all words spoken on their holy rings." Doom processed the theological framework in approximately 2 seconds. The Covenant believed the Forerunners were gods. They believed this ring was sacred. They believed that anything sufficiently powerful and unexplained was, by definition, either divine or heretical. He had arrived on a Forerunner panel, alone, unafraid, demonstrating technology that no human or Covenant possessed, in a universe where the question of what the Forerunners had left behind was apparently still very much open. The calculation was straightforward. "I am no construct," Doom said, and let one hand rise, mystic energy coiling between his gauntleted fingers, golden green fire that had no place in this universe's physics, that the Covenant's instruments would read as completely unclassifiable, that would look to a species that had built its entire civilization on the worship of ancient alien technology, like something genuinely beyond their comprehension. The sorcery cost him. He felt the drain immediately, the reserve drawing down faster than it would have at home. But the investment was worth it. "I am something your gods did not anticipate." Fal Chavami stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds. Then he dropped to one knee. Behind him, 6 of the 12 elites followed. The veterans, the ones whose faith was deepest, whose pattern matching had locked onto divine manifestation and refused to let go. The other 6 kept their rifles up, because they were younger and more skeptical, and the specific religious experience required to kneel before an unknown armored figure in an active combat zone had not yet been accumulated. The Hunters did not kneel. Hunters never knelt. Their assault cannons remained aimed at Doom's center mass with the patient, geological certainty of creatures that measured time in decades. Johnson's voice crackled in the chief's ear from 40 meters back, low and disbelieving. "Did that elite just bow?" "Yes," the chief said. "To Doom?" "Yes." A pause. "Well, that's not good." Doom looked down at Fal Chavami with the expression his mask never showed, but his silence always communicated, the precise, controlled satisfaction of a man whose gambit had paid out exactly as calculated. He had not lied. He was something the Covenant's gods had not anticipated. He was Victor von Doom, and he was standing in the middle of a war between 2 civilizations, and he had just made himself relevant to the most powerful military force on this ring in the time it took to cast a single spell. The drain on his reserves registered in the corner of his awareness like a clock counting down. Worth it. For now, the Forerunner control room was not where the UNSC thought it was. Cortana had been running topographical analysis on Installation 4's surface geometry since the Pillar of Autumn's crash, cross-referencing the ring's visible architecture with the fragmentary Forerunner data recovered from Sigma Octanus 4 and the limited intelligence gathered from previous Covenant engagements near Forerunner sites. Her model was good, genuinely impressive for an AI working with incomplete data under combat conditions. But it was built on human assumptions about how a structure of this scale would be organized. Cortana assumed the control room would be centralized, positioned for maximum administrative efficiency, accessible from the ring's interior surface. Doom's sensors told a different story. He had spent 40 minutes on the Forerunner panel, while the theological crisis among Fal Chavami's surviving elites resolved itself into a tense, watchful escort rather than a firefight. And in those 40 minutes, his instruments had mapped enough of the ring's substructure to understand something fundamental about Forerunner design philosophy. They did not build for administrative efficiency. They built for redundancy. Layered systems within systems, each capable of independent operation. The whole architecture oriented not around convenience, but around survival. The control room wasn't centralized. It was buried, positioned at the confluence of the ring's primary energy conduits. Accessible only through a Forerunner interior network that the ring's surface gave no indication existed, or which meant the Covenant's entire search operation was looking in the wrong place. Which meant Doom had a window. He did not share this information with the chief immediately. Information was currency, and Victor von Doom did not spend currency without understanding the exchange rate. Instead, he walked the Forerunner panel's surface for another 10 minutes, letting his sensors drink in everything the substructure would offer, assembling a map that existed nowhere else in this universe. Not in UNSC databases, not in Covenant sacred texts, not in whatever remained of Cortana's incomplete model. The map lived in his armor's memory banks and, more importantly, in his own exceptional mind. The chief had watched him work without interrupting, which Doom noted with something approaching approval, and the Spartan understood the value of patience in a way most soldiers never learned. The capacity to observe without acting, to gather before spending. The AI, Cortana, had been less restrained. Her voice had emerged twice from the chief's armor with pointed questions about what Doom's sensors were finding. And both times Doom had declined to answer. And both times the silence that followed had carried the specific texture of an extremely intelligent artificial mind, recalibrating its approach. She was good. He would need to be careful with her. Fal Chavami had maintained his watchful distance, the theological framework he'd constructed around Doom clearly still load-bearing. The Ultra had not attempted to communicate further, which told Doom that the elite was processing, on reordering his understanding of the divine hierarchy around this new variable, and had not yet reached conclusions. The 6 skeptical elites had their plasma rifles at low ready. The hunters had not moved their cannons at all. It was Johnson who finally broke the silence, because Johnson, Doom was learning, operated on a philosophical framework entirely his own. One that involved saying exactly what he was thinking, regardless of audience, tactical situation, or the potential consequences of honesty. "You've been standing on that plate for 40 minutes, the sergeant said, approaching from the tree line with the rolling confidence of a man who had decided that the armored interdimensional conqueror was probably not going to shoot him today. "You find something, or are you just enjoying the view?" "Both," Doom said. "Care to share with the class?" Doom turned to face him fully, then extended his gaze to include the chief, who had moved to Johnson's left with the automatic positioning instinct of someone who was always thinking about fields of fire. Then, because the situation required functional alliance, even if it did not require trust, and because these soldiers had information he needed in exchange for information they needed, Doom made a decision. "The control room," he said, "is not where your AI believes it to be." The chief's helmet moved toward him with that slow, deliberate attention. "Cortana." Not a question, an invitation for the AI to respond. He's right. Cortana's voice emerged from the chief's armor with the particular tone of an intelligence acknowledging something it found simultaneously impressive and irritating. I've been running his sensor output through my own models for the last 30 minutes. The energy conduit network doesn't converge where I projected. It converges approximately 40 kilometers northeast, at a depth of 200 meters below the surface. My original model had a 17% margin of error. I didn't weight it heavily enough. A pause. His instruments are better than anything in UNSC inventory. Considerably better, Doom confirmed, without inflection, because stating facts was not arrogance. Arrogance was overstating them. What followed was the particular kind of negotiation that happens between parties who do not trust each other, but have temporarily aligned interests. The kind where everything said carries a secondary meaning, and everyone in the conversation is aware of it. The chief wanted the control room because Cortana believed she could use it to access the ring systems, potentially find Captain Keyes, potentially understand what the Covenant was actually looking for. Johnson wanted it because his military instincts correctly identified it as the highest value target on the ring. Cortana wanted it because she was an AI facing a structure built by the greatest technological civilization this universe had ever produced. And the hunger for that knowledge was written into her fundamental architecture. Doom wanted it because it was the most powerful thing on the ring. And powerful things belonged to him. He did not say this last part aloud. He didn't need to. The chief, he suspected, had already inferred it. "We move together," the chief said, but it was framed as a statement, but functioned as a question. "Will you accept this condition?" Delivered with the economy of a soldier who had learned that elaborate negotiation cost time and time cost lives. "We move together," Doom agreed, "until our interests diverge, at which point we will diverge. I will not pretend otherwise, and I suggest you extend me the same honesty." Johnson looked at the chief. The chief looked at Doom. "Fair enough," the Spartan said. Behind them, Fal Chavami had been listening through his translator with the focused intensity of a being whose entire theological universe was reorganizing around a fixed new point. The armored figure knew where the sacred ring's heart was. The armored figure moved with the divine certainty of something that did not ask permission from the universe. It simply knew. The Ultra rose from his monitoring crouch and spoke quietly in Sangheli, the words cycling through his translator with a half-second delay. "The heretics search blindly," Fal said. And there was something in his voice that had not been there before. A fracture in the absolute certainty that the Covenant's faith required. "The prophets told us the sacred rings were gifts, weapons of transcendence, instruments of the great journey. They told us the forerunners ascended through them." He paused, mandibles moving in the subtle pattern that the Covenant's behavioral language coded as doubt being suppressed. "They did not tell us that the rings could be controlled." Doom turned to regard the elite with the specific attention he reserved for things that had just become more interesting. "Your prophets," he said, "you do not know what this ring does." Fal's silence was confirmation enough. "I do," Doom said. He did not, yet not fully, but the substructure readings had given him enough to understand the scale of it, the shape of the function, the terrible elegance of a weapon built to operate at galactic range. And what it does has nothing to do with transcendence. The forest around them was quiet in the way that forests on manufactured rings were always quiet. Engineered silence, the sound of a system maintaining itself, ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to the small dramatic crises of the organic beings moving across its surface. Fal Chavami looked at the tree line, at the distant glow of a Covenant encampment 3 kilometers north, at the ring's impossible curve overhead. at everything his faith had been built on. And then he looked at Doom. "Show me," the elite said. The journey northeast took 4 hours. Not because the distance was prohibitive. Doom's repulsors could have covered 40 kilometers in minutes. And the Chief's augmented physiology made sustained high-speed movement trivially achievable. The delay was tactical. The Covenant search operation had deployed across the ring's interior in a pattern that Cortana mapped in real time, pulling signal intelligence from Covenant comm traffic that she intercepted and partially decrypted with the focused aggression of an AI that treated enemy encryption as a personal affront. 3 Phantom dropships ran grid search patterns at low altitude. 2 Wraith tanks had been deployed to the northeastern quadrant, exactly where Doom's sensor map indicated the control room's access point was located. A Covenant Scarab, its massive plasma drill cycling at low power, moved along the ring's surface 2 kilometers ahead, stripping Forerunner panel sections with the methodical patience of a civilization that had been excavating sacred sites for 10,000 years and had learned that patience was indistinguishable from piety. The Scarab was the problem. 4 stories of articulated alien engineering, its hull proof against everything in the UNSC's ground arsenal short of a Scorpion tank, which they did not have. The Chief assessed it in silence, running engagement calculations, and Johnson suggested 3 approaches, all of which involved acceptable Marine casualties in the 20 to 40% range, which Johnson delivered with the flat affect of a soldier who had made peace with the mathematics of war. Doom listened to both of them and then said, "No." Johnson turned to him. "No what?" "No casualties. No direct engagement." Doom's sensors swept the Scarab's profile, mapping its power systems, identifying the plasma drill's energy feed, tracing the conduits from the main reactor to the Walker's leg actuators. The Covenant built their heaviest vehicles around Forerunner energy principles, not identical to Forerunner technology, but derivative of it. The way a copy of a painting retains the original's composition while losing its depth. Which meant the Scarab systems had a specific vulnerability that its engineers, working from inherited rather than understood principles, had never fully addressed. "I will handle it." He reached inward for his sorcery. The drain hit him immediately, harder than the display on the Forerunner panel, and harder than the casual casting he'd used to unsettle Foul's elites. This universe offered nothing back. Every calorie of mystic energy he spent came directly from the reserves he'd arrived with. And those reserves, while vast by any standard his universe recognized, were not infinite. He had been running calculations since the forest, tracking expenditure against estimated reserve depth, and the numbers were producing a timeline he did not find acceptable. He needed to be economical. What he used on the Scarab was not a combat spell. It was something subtler, a Doom variant of the same mystical engineering principles he applied to his armor systems, a precise application of force at a molecular level, targeted at the plasma drill's energy feed coupling. Not destruction, interruption, the specific frequency of mystical interference that would read to the Scarab's Covenant operators as a mechanical fault in the drill's primary conduit. The kind of fault that required immediate shutdown and manual inspection, because a plasma drill operating with a compromised feed coupling had a tendency to catastrophically feedback into the vehicle's main reactor. The spell cost him. He did not show it. The Scarab stopped moving 30 seconds later. Its drill powered down with the grinding deceleration of interrupted machinery. Hatches opened along its upper hull as Covenant engineers emerged to investigate, their instruments already cycling through diagnostic routines that would find exactly the fault Doom had introduced. Real enough to read as genuine, superficial enough to be correctable, time-consuming enough to matter. "And how did you do that?" Cortana asked from the Chief's armor, and there was something in her voice beyond tactical curiosity. the specific hunger of an intelligence that had encountered a phenomenon outside its modeling parameters. Sorcery, Doom said. A pause. That's not a real answer. It is the only answer you are currently equipped to process. The chief moved them around the Scarab's eastern flank, while its crew was occupied, threading through a dry riverbed that Doom's map indicated ran parallel to the Forerunner conduit network below. Johnson's Marines moved with practiced quiet, the veterans among them having absorbed the lesson that in this particular combat zone, silence was the only currency that reliably purchased survival. Fal Chavami moved with them. The elite's presence was a persistent complication that had resolved itself through the specific alchemy of shared enemy and mutual uncertainty into something that functioned like a truce without any of the parties involved being entirely comfortable naming it that. The Wraith tanks were easier. Doom handled them with directed electromagnetic pulse, purely technological, no sorcery required, his armor generating the burst frequency that collapsed the Wraith's plasma mortar targeting systems and locked their anti-gravity drives in a holding pattern that left them mobile but tactically blind. 2 vehicles worth of Covenant crew spent 40 minutes trying to diagnose a system failure while Doom's group passed within 600 meters of their position. And it was during those 600 meters that the drain announced itself properly. Not dramatically, Doom did not do drama in private, but the internal diagnostic running continuously in the corner of his awareness updated its projection, and the update was not favorable. The sorcery spent on the Scarab's coupling, combined with the earlier display for Fal's benefit, combined with the ambient cost of maintaining his force field at partial power in a universe that offered no mystical replenishment, had drawn his reserves down further than he'd projected. The math was recalculating. He had enough for perhaps 3 significant castings. 4, if he was precise. 5, if he was willing to accept consequences afterward that he did not intend to accept. The armor compensated. It always compensated. That was the point of it. The reason Victor Von Doom had spent 20 years building a suit that was simultaneously the most advanced technology his universe's science could produce, and a vessel for sorcerous amplification. Without the mystical component operating at full capacity, the Doom armor was still formidable beyond anything this universe's military had encountered. Energy shields that Covenant plasma struggled to penetrate. Repulsor systems that outperformed Covenant anti-gravity drives. Weapons arrays that could engage targets from atmosphere to low orbit. A processing intelligence that, while not Cortana's equal in raw data throughput, exceeded her in strategic synthesis and lateral thinking. He was not diminished. He was reconfigured. The distinction mattered to him, and he spent 30 seconds of the march making sure it was clearly established in his own mind. Because clarity of self-assessment was the difference between adapting and failing. And Doom did not fail. The access point materialized ahead as the riverbed curved northeast. A Forerunner structure emerging from the ring's substrate like a geometric reef, its angles too perfect for geology, its surface the same unclassifiable alloy his sensors had been reading all day. Larger than anything they'd passed. A vertical face of interlocking panels 40 meters high, its surface traced with the light script that Forerunner architecture used in place of conventional signage. Not decorative, Doom's analysis confirmed, but functional. The light patterns encoding system status information in a language that no living being in this universe could read. No living being except, potentially, Cortana. I can read fragments of it, she said, her voice carrying the specific quality of an intelligence operating at the edge of its capability and finding that edge exhilarating rather than frightening. The patterns are related to the data structures I've seen in other Forerunner sites. It's like a dialect. The same root language, different regional development. I need more time with it. "You will have time later," Doom said. "What does it say now?" A 3-second pause, an eternity for an AI of Cortana's processing speed. "It says the installation is active. Primary systems online." Another pause, and it says something is already inside. The group stopped moving. Johnson's Marines raised their weapons. Fal Chavami's hand moved to his energy sword with the smooth automation of 60 years of combat reflexes. Doom's sensors swept the structure's interior and found something his instruments initially refused to classify. Not Covenant, not human, not Forerunner construct. Biological, but wrong. The signature was organic but distributed, present in multiple locations simultaneously, connected by something that read as both nervous system and data network. Its energy output fluctuating in patterns that his analysis engine kept trying to categorize as communication before settling, reluctantly, on something far more disturbing. Consumption. "Chief," Doom said. And something in his voice, not fear because Victor Von Doom had not been afraid in 20 years, but the precise, calibrated tone of a man who had encountered a variable he had not adequately modeled, made the Spartan go still. "What do you know about the flood?" The silence that followed had weight to it. Cortana spoke first, and her voice had changed. The exhilaration of linguistic discovery replaced by something flat and controlled that Doom recognized as an intelligence managing its own distress. "The flood is a parasitic organism," she said. "It assimilates host organisms. It doesn't stop." "How large is the infestation in this structure?" Another pause. "Longer." "Based on your sensor readings." She stopped. "Cortana," the chief said quietly. "Large," she said. "It's very large." Above them, the Forerunner structure's light script pulsed once, a deep, slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. And then the access panels began to open. The flood did not announce itself. That was the first thing Doom cataloged, not as fear, but as tactical data, filed with the cold precision of a mind that had faced Galactus and Mephisto and the Beyonder, and had learned that the most dangerous threats were the ones that did not perform their danger before delivering it. The Covenant announced themselves with plasma fire and religious proclamation. The UNSC announced themselves with challenge protocols and rank insignia. The flood simply emerged, pouring from the opened access panels in a wave of wrongness that hit the senses before the mind could fully process it. The smell first, rot and copper and something chemical underneath, the sound second, a wet chitinous percussion that had no business coming from things that had once been soldiers, and then the sight of them, combat forms that had been human or Covenant an unknowable number of hours ago and were now neither, their bodies restructured by an intelligence that understood biology the way an engineer understood clay. Johnson opened fire. His Marines followed in the same breath, the disciplined overlapping fields of MA-5B fire that UNSC infantry training drilled into muscle memory. The combat forms absorbed the kinetic rounds with the indifference of things that had renegotiated their relationship with pain and found it one-sided. Rounds punched through torsos that had no critical architecture left to destroy. Limbs separated and continued moving. Headshots accomplished nothing against organisms that had redistributed their neural processing across the entire body mass. The chief moved into them, where Doom watched the Spartan work for exactly 4 seconds, because 4 seconds was sufficient to extract everything tactically relevant from the observation. The chief fought with the specific efficiency of a soldier who had faced the flood before, not the panicked adaptation of first contact, but the grim, precise violence of someone who had learned the hard way what worked and what didn't. Shotgun at close range, targeting the central mass where the flood's infection apparatus was most concentrated. Fragmentation grenades to handle clusters. constant movement, never stationary long enough for the combat form's grab attacks to establish purchase. The Mjolnir armor's shields absorbing the hits that couldn't be avoided, cycling back toward recharge between engagements. Effective, expensive in ammunition, yet sustainable for approximately 12 minutes at this contact density before the reload problem became critical. Doom's force field was already up, the Flood combat forms breaking against it like water against stone. Infection forms, the small crab-like things that constituted the Flood's primary vector, launched themselves at him in waves and detonated against the field's surface with small wet impacts that registered on his sensors as negligible. A combat form that had once been an elite drove a bone blade appendage into the field with enough force to rock Doom back 6 inches. He registered the impact, calculated the force. Impressive, genuinely impressive. 3 tons of restructured biological mass moving at combat speed, and fired a repulsor burst that reduced the combat form to component pieces. The pieces kept moving. He fired again, targeting the infection cluster at the form's center, and this time it stopped. Destroy the central mass. Noted. Fal Chavami was fighting with the contained fury of a being confronting something his theology had not prepared him for. The Covenant knew of the Flood. Their sacred texts reference the parasite obliquely in passages that the prophets had always interpreted as metaphorical, warnings against spiritual corruption rather than literal biological threat. The Ultra was discovering, in the most direct way available, that the prophets had been wrong. His energy sword carved through combat forms with the elegant violence of 60 years of martial mastery. And where the blade's superheated plasma touched Flood biology, it cauterized rather than just cut, which was more effective than conventional weapons. The heat disrupted the infection apparatus along with the structural tissue. He was holding his own, but his mandibles were set in the configuration that Doom had already learned to read, as a certainty being dismantled in real time. The access panels had stopped opening. The wave was finite. This was a forward element, a probe rather than a full assault. The Flood testing the new variables it had detected outside its containment. Doom's sensors swept the structure's interior and mapped the infestation's depth. The large reading Cortana had reported was accurate, but it was concentrated in the lower levels, around something his instruments identified as a containment architecture of Forerunner design. A prison. The Flood had been held here, deliberately, in a facility built by beings who understood the parasite well enough to cage it. The cage had been partially opened, not by the Flood, from outside. Covenant excavation teams, searching blindly for the ring's sacred heart, had breached a containment wall 3 days ago and not understood what they'd found until the infection forms reached them. The Flood had been consuming Covenant soldiers in the lower levels for 72 hours, building its biomass, preparing the combat forms that had just emerged into the light. Doom processed this and felt something that was not quite anger, but occupied the same cognitive space. The specific irritation of encountering catastrophic incompetence in people whose incompetence had created problems he now had to solve. The Covenant had cracked open a prison they didn't understand and released something their theology had told them was metaphorical. The last combat form went down under a combined burst from Johnson's rifle and Doom's repulsor, and the access corridor fell into the particular silence that follows violence. Heavier than ordinary silence, textured with the sound of people breathing harder than they want to. Then Cortana spoke. "It knows you're here," she said, and her voice had the quality Doom had learned to associate with her processing something that genuinely disturbed her. Not just the forward elements, the main mass. It registered your presence specifically, your energy signature. It's been running analysis since your first sorcery discharge on the Forerunner panel. How sophisticated is its analysis capability? Doom asked. The Flood's central intelligence, what we call the Gravemind, operates on a level that exceeds any individual mind in this universe. It doesn't think like a person. It thinks like... She paused. Like a library that became aware of itself. It has absorbed the knowledge of every civilization it has ever consumed. Forerunner military commanders, Covenant prophets, human scientists. Another pause, this one longer. It has never encountered anything like you. Doom was quiet for a moment. Around him, Johnson's Marines were reloading with the practiced speed of people who expected the next wave momentarily. The chief stood at the mouth of the access corridor, shotgun ready, watching the darkness inside with the patient attention of something that had learned to treat darkness as a tactical problem rather than a psychological one. It finds me interesting, Doom said. It finds you valuable, Cortana said. And now her voice had an edge to it that Doom recognized as the specific fear of an intelligence that could model outcomes clearly enough to find them genuinely frightening. The Flood doesn't want to fight you. It wants to absorb you, your knowledge, your sorcery, your armor's technology, everything you are and everything you know, added to everything it already is. A pause. If the Gravemind assimilates a mind of your caliber, combined with what it already has from the Forerunners, it would be unstoppable, the chief said quietly from the corridor mouth. In this universe, Doom said. Yes. He turned the word over once, examining it from multiple angles, finding it accurate and therefore filing it without emotional weight. Then he looked at the structure's access corridor, at the darkness inside, at the faint bioluminescent pulse of Flood biology visible in the deeper shadows, at the shape of the facility beyond, where somewhere beneath 200 meters of Forerunner engineering, the control room waited. The control room was inside the structure. The Flood was inside the structure. And the Gravemind, the central intelligence of a parasite that had consumed galaxies, that had absorbed the knowledge of the greatest civilization this universe had ever produced, that had just identified Victor Von Doom as the single most valuable absorption target it had ever encountered. Was, his sensors confirmed, and also inside the structure. 3 objectives, 1 location, 1 path forward. Doom looked at the corridor and made his calculations, and his calculations told him what he had known since Cortana first described the Flood with that particular flatness in her voice. That the Gravemind would not wait for him to come to it. That the Flood's intelligence was already repositioning its forces in the lower levels, already developing a strategy specifically tailored to the new variable standing at its threshold. That somewhere in the darkness beneath them, something ancient and vast and hungry was thinking about him. The correct response to being thought about by an existential intelligence was not to wait. Doom stepped into the corridor. After a moment, the chief followed. The Forerunner facility's interior existed at a scale that made human architecture feel apologetic. Corridors 40 meters wide and 60 meters tall, their walls traced with the same light script Cortana was still parsing. The functional poetry of a civilization that had built permanence into every surface. The floors were seamless alloy. The joins between panels so precise they registered on Doom's sensors as single continuous surfaces rather than assembled components. Gravity plating ran through the substructure, maintaining consistent orientation regardless of the ring's rotation. A passive system, self-sustaining, operating on principles that Doom's instruments could measure but not yet fully reverse engineer. The air was cold and carried the specific stillness of spaces that had been sealed for 100,000 years and had only recently been violated. The Flood had changed the interior. not destroyed. The flood was not destructive in the way that warfare was destructive. The random entropy of violence applied without consideration. The flood was purposeful. The biomass it had been building over 72 hours had been deployed architecturally. Tendrils of organic material threading along the corridor walls like a second nervous system laid over the forerunner structure's first one. Bioluminescent nodes pulsing at irregular intervals with the slow rhythm of a distributed intelligence processing information. The combat forms they passed, dead from the initial engagement, had already been partially reabsorbed, their mass being reclaimed by the biomass network, with the efficient economy of a system that wasted nothing. It was, Doom thought, remarkably well organized for something that human intelligence classified as a parasite. He revised his assessment upward. They moved in a formation that the chief established without discussion. The Spartan on point, Johnson and his 3 surviving Marines in the middle. Fal Chavami watching the rear with his energy sword drawn and his plasma rifle ready. Doom positioned slightly outside the formation's geometry in a way that communicated, without words, that he was not part of it. Present, parallel, not subordinate. They had covered 200 meters of descending corridor when the Gravemind spoke. And it did not speak the way living things spoke, with breath and vocal cords and the physical infrastructure of biological communication. It spoke the way a flood spoke, which was to say it spoke everywhere at once, its voice emerging from the biomass nodes in the walls simultaneously, a resonance that bypassed the ears and registered directly in the chest. The frequency calibrated to the specific range that caused involuntary physiological stress responses in most carbon-based life forms. Most. A new voice, a new mind, something the consuming dark has never tasted. The Marines stopped moving. 2 of them took an involuntary step backward, not cowardice, just biology. The body's honest response to a stimulus it had not been built to process. Johnson held his position through what Doom recognized as sheer, experienced will and the specific stubbornness of a man who had decided long ago that he would not give the universe the satisfaction of watching him flinch. The chief had not moved at all. Fal Chavami's mandibles were spread wide, not in aggression, but in something that translated across species lines as awe. The physiological marker of a being confronting something that exceeded its categorical framework. The Gravemind's voice had come from the walls, from the building, from the dead forms on the floor, from everywhere simultaneously, which his 60 years of combat experience had no protocol for. Doom looked at the nearest biomass node, pulsing with its slow bioluminescent rhythm, and said, "You have been reading my energy signature since my arrival." A pause. The pause of something vast, considering how to modulate itself for a specific audience. We have tasted 10,000 years of thought. Forerunner certainty, covenant faith, human defiance. Each mind a universe consumed and added to the whole. But you. The resonance shifted frequency, and Doom felt it pressing against his force field not physically, but informationally, probing the field's outer surface with something that functioned like curiosity. You carry knowledge from beyond the boundaries of what is. Your universe is not our universe. Your laws are not our laws. What you are is impossible by every measure we have consumed. And yet, here I stand, Doom said. Yes. The word carried harmonics that the translator in Fal's armor rendered as approximately 17 simultaneous emotional registers, none of which mapped cleanly to anything the elite psychology recognized. Here you stand. The Gravemind has consumed the knowledge of the Forerunners themselves, their history, their fear, their final desperate calculations. We know what the rings do. We know why they were built. We know the price the Forerunners paid to build them. A pulse through the biomass network, slow and deliberate. We know what you found in the substructure readings. You know it too, and still you came inside. Knowledge requires proximity, Doom said, and the words came out with the specific cadence of a man who had said something true and knew it, which was different from the cadence of someone performing truth. The Gravemind's response was not words. It was an offer, communicated through the biomass network in a language that bypassed linguistics entirely and addressed the part of Doom's mind that processed meaning rather than syntax. An image, or the functional equivalent of an image. A complete informational package delivered in the time it took for a single biomass node to pulse. The control room, seen from inside, its systems fully active, its interface panels lit with the particular light of Forerunner technology operating at capacity. The ring's firing mechanism displayed in complete technical detail. The full specifications of a weapon capable of sterilizing all neurologically complex life within 25,000 light years. Not described, shown with the precision of a mind that had absorbed the Forerunner engineers who built it. And alongside it, another image. Doom, standing at the control room's central interface, his armor integrated with the ring's systems, his mind augmented, expanded, connected to the full depth of what the Gravemind had consumed over 10,000 years of absorption, operating the ring with the comprehensive authority of a being who had access to every piece of knowledge ever generated by every civilization the Flood had ever encountered. "You want to rule," the Gravemind said. "We offer dominion beyond any single universe. Everything we have consumed, Forerunner, Covenant, human, and 1,000 civilizations beyond, becomes yours. Not absorption, partnership. You keep your mind, your will, your identity. We give you everything else." The corridor was very quiet. Johnson, to his left, had his rifle raised and pointed at a biomass node, which was the military instinct equivalent of pointing a pistol at the ocean. Technically, a response, practically meaningless. The chief was absolutely still, and Doom could feel Cortana running calculations in the Spartan's armor, modeling outcomes with the focused desperation of an intelligence that understood exactly how attractive this offer would sound to a man with Doom's particular psychology. She was right to be calculating. The offer was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. The Gravemind had correctly identified Doom's core motivation, dominion, the desire to impose order on a chaotic universe, and had constructed a proposal that addressed it directly. The knowledge of 10,000 years of consumed civilizations, the Forerunner's full technical legacy, the ring's firing mechanism, partnership rather than absorption, which the Gravemind had offered because it understood from its analysis of his energy signature and behavioral patterns that Doom would reject absorption as an insult and might accept partnership as a negotiation. It was, Doom thought, the most sophisticated manipulation he had encountered since Mephisto, which told him everything he needed to know, because Mephisto was not in the habit of offering genuine partnerships. Mephisto offered arrangements that appeared to serve both parties and were constructed, at every level, to serve only one. The Gravemind had consumed 10,000 years of thought and had learned to think like the most dangerous minds those civilizations had produced. And the most dangerous minds, in Doom's experience, were the ones that offered you exactly what you wanted. The Flood did not make partnerships. The Flood made hosts. "You have made a tactical error," Doom said. The biomass nodes pulsed. "Me explain." "You revealed the control room's location and the ring's complete technical specifications in order to make your offer credible," Doom said. I now have that information, regardless of my answer." He paused. "My answer is no." The Gravemind's silence lasted 4 seconds, an eternity for an intelligence of its processing depth. When it spoke again, the harmonics had changed, the 17 simultaneous registers resolving into something that translated across every species in the corridor as a single unambiguous emotion. "Then you will be consumed like all the rest." The biomass network exploded into motion. The flood did not attack the way armies attacked. Armies had command structures, communication delays, the friction of orders moving from intent to execution through the imperfect medium of individual soldiers interpreting instructions under stress. The flood had none of this. The Gravemind's decision to consume, rather than negotiate, transmitted through the biomass network at the speed of nerve impulse, and every combat form in the facility received it simultaneously. Not as an order, but as a change in state. The way a single electrical signal transforms a muscle from relaxed to contracted. The facility went from tense stillness to coordinated assault in the span of a single heartbeat. And the assault came from every direction at once, because the flood had spent 4 seconds, while Doom was delivering his refusal, repositioning its forces along every approach vector simultaneously. 4 seconds was a long time for the Gravemind to prepare. It was also a long time for Doom. The force field expanded to its maximum radius the instant the biomass network shifted. Doom had been watching the pulse frequency of the nodes since they entered the corridor, and had identified the specific modulation change that preceded coordinated movement, which meant his field was at full power before the first combat form reached him. The outer edge of the field caught 3 combat forms in mid-lunge, and the kinetic discharge sent them into the walls at sufficient velocity to compromise their structural integrity in ways that mattered. The Chief was already moving, the Spartan's combat instincts operating faster than conscious decision-making, the Mjolnir armor's shield cycling to full power as shotgun fire began painting the corridor in controlled bursts. Close range, targeting center mass. The specific technique of a soldier who had developed muscle memory for fighting an enemy that most of the universe had never survived long enough to learn. Johnson dropped to one knee and laid down, suppressing fire with the economical precision of someone who understood that in this corridor, ammunition was a finite resource, and panic was a force multiplier for the wrong side. Fal Chavami fought like a wall. The Ultra's energy sword moved in the tight, devastating arcs of a martial tradition 60 years in the making. When the superheated plasma edge cauterizing flood tissue as it cut, the heat disruption effective enough that combat forms dropped and stayed down rather than reforming. His plasma rifle handled the infection forms, the small ones, the vectors, the things that turned corpses into new soldiers. With the methodical thoroughness of a soldier who had identified the correct threat priority and was addressing it without distraction. Whatever theological crisis the Gravemind's voice had triggered in Fal's faith, it had not touched his reflexes. But there were many of them. The corridor's biomass network was generating new combat forms from the dead, reabsorbing the fallen from the initial engagement and rebuilding them faster than Doom had projected. The Gravemind apparently having determined that quantity of pressure was the correct approach against a force field that individual combat forms couldn't breach. A wall of flood biology pressing against his field's outer edge from 3 directions. The cumulative force registering on his sensors as a steadily climbing number that had not yet reached his field's tolerance threshold, but was climbing with the patient, hydraulic inevitability of water finding its level. Doom fired. Not sorcery. He was hoarding what remained of his reserves with the focused discipline of a man who had recalculated his timeline and found the margin uncomfortably narrow. The Doom armor's weapons array was fully online, and he used it with the same precision he applied to everything. identifying the structural nodes where the biomass network interfaced with the Forerunner facility's walls and targeting them specifically. Destroying combat forms was attrition. Destroying the network's infrastructure was surgery. Each node he eliminated reduced the Gravemind's coordination capacity in a localized area, creating gaps in the assault's coherence that the Chief and Fal immediately exploited without needing to be told. Because both of them were reading the same battlefield geometry he was and drawing identical conclusions. Good. Working with competent beings was rare enough to be noteworthy. "The control room," Doom said, his voice carrying the specific calm of a man conducting a conversation while simultaneously managing a weapons array and a force field under active assault. Cortana, distance and bearing. 60 meters, a bearing 270 through the large junction ahead. Her voice was controlled, the calculations running continuously in the background. "There's a significant flood concentration between us and the junction. Heavier than the combat forms. I'm reading pure biomass, no individual forms, just mass." "A barrier," Doom said. "A wall," she corrected. "The Gravemind has been building it since you refused the offer. It's sealing the control room approach." The Gravemind was learning in real time. It had assessed Doom's refusal, identified the control room as his objective, and was denying him access by the simplest possible method. Physical obstruction. Flood biomass packed into the corridor at sufficient density to stop conventional movement and force an engagement that would drain his reserves and the Chief's ammunition simultaneously. Not elegant, but a mind that had consumed 10,000 years of military strategy understood that elegance was for situations where simple solutions were unavailable. "Johnson," Doom said. "Yeah. Take your Marines and Fal to the junction's northern approach. You will find a secondary corridor that my sensor map indicates bypasses the biomass concentration. Hold that position." Johnson looked at him for exactly 1 second. The specific look of a soldier deciding whether to follow orders from someone who was not in his chain of command, the calculation visible in his expression, even in a firefight. Then he said, "Marines, with me," and moved, because pragmatism was the highest military virtue, and Johnson had long since achieved mastery of it. Fal went with them. Not because Doom had included him in the order, but because the elite's own tactical assessment had reached the same conclusion, and 60 years of combat experience expressed itself as movement rather than discussion. The Chief stayed, not because Doom had asked him to, because the Spartan had made his own calculation, looked at the biomass wall ahead and the force field maintaining its pressure behind, and determined that whatever Doom intended to do about the wall was something that merited a witness with a functioning weapon system. Doom appreciated the logic, if not the company. He reached inward. 2 significant castings remaining. Perhaps 3 if he compressed the energy expenditure on the accepted reduced effect for reduced cost. The biomass wall ahead was dense. His sensors put it at 8 meters thick, organic material compacted to the structural integrity of reinforced concrete, laced through with the flood's neural network so that it was simultaneously a physical barrier and a sensory apparatus, feeding the Gravemind real-time data about everything on both sides. He could burn through it. The sorcery required was substantial but achievable, a sustained thermal application at the molecular level, the same principle he'd used on the Scarab's coupling, but inverted, generating heat rather than disruption. The biomass would destabilize. The neural network running through it would be severed. The Gravemind would lose its sensory coverage of this corridor section for the time it took to rebuild, which Doom estimated at 4 to 6 minutes. 4 to 6 minutes was sufficient. But burning through the wall was not the most efficient application of what he had left. He had already identified what the control room contained. He had already mapped its systems from the substructure readings. He knew what the ring did, and he knew that operating it required interfacing with a system of a complexity that would demand everything his armor's processing capacity could produce. If he spent his remaining reserves on the wall, he would reach the control room depleted, technologically capable. But without the sorceress component that gave him options, his armor's hardware alone could not provide. The alternative was to go through the wall without sorcery. His armor's repulsors at maximum output, targeted at a single point on the wall's surface. He would generate sufficient force to breach it physically, not cleanly, not quickly, but achievable. The cost was energy cells rather than mystic reserves, and his energy cells were rechargeable from local power sources in a way his mystic reserves were not. The correct answer was obvious once he framed it that way. Doom brought both gauntlets up, configured the repulsors for maximum focused output, and fired. The wall came apart in a cascade of disrupted biomass, the flood's organic material losing coherence as the repulsor field tore through its neural network and stripped the intelligence from the physical structure simultaneously. Not elegant. Loud, destructive, resource expensive in ways that would matter later, and completely effective in the way that mattered now. They went through. The control room was exactly where his sensor map had placed it. A chamber of extraordinary scale. Its ceiling lost in darkness 60 meters above. Its walls covered in the most complex Forerunner interface architecture Doom had yet encountered. Every surface alive with light script and active data displays, running in languages that Cortana was already processing with audible focus. Her analysis streaming into the Chief's audio feed in a torrent of partial translations and structural assessments. At the chamber's center, rising from the floor in a column of pale light, was the ring's primary interface, a holographic construct of the ring's full firing system, displayed in complete operational detail. Every component mapped and labeled in Forerunner script, and the activation sequence laid out with the clinical precision of engineers who had built the weapon to be used and had designed the interface accordingly. Doom walked to it. Behind him, through the breached wall, the sound of the flood reorganizing, the Gravemind processing the new situation, calculating its next move, understanding that the thing it had been trying to keep out was now inside the most important room on the ring. He placed his gauntleted hands on the interface. The room responded. The interface recognized him, not as a reclaimer, the Forerunner designation for the species they had chosen as their inheritors, the genetic legacy that gave humans a specific biological key to Forerunner technology. Doom was not human in the way the Forerunners had defined the term, and his genome carried no reclaimer markers. But the interface's recognition system operated on multiple authentication layers, and the biological layer was only one of them. The second layer was technological, and the Doom armor's energy signature, its processing architecture, its fundamental design philosophy of integrated science and sorcery, resonated with Forerunner systems in a way that his instruments had been detecting since his arrival on the panel in the forest. The Forerunners had also married technology and something beyond technology. They had also built systems that operated at the intersection of the measurable and the impossible. The interface did not know what Doom was, but it recognized what he understood. The holographic construct expanded outward from the central column, filling the chamber with a complete operational map of Installation 04. Not just the ring's geography, but its systems. Every active process displayed in real time with the comprehensive transparency of a machine that had been designed to be operated by its builders and had never anticipated needing to conceal its functions from anyone standing at its console. Power distribution, atmospheric management, gravity plating, The containment architecture for the Flood. Doom could see it now in full. The deliberate prison design and the layered barriers that the Covenant excavation teams had breached with the theological certainty of beings who didn't know what they were opening. And at the center of everything, the firing mechanism, not a button, not a simple trigger, but a process, a sequence of calibrations and confirmations that the Forerunners had built with sufficient complexity to prevent accidental activation and sufficient clarity to enable deliberate use. Cortana was already working. She had transferred a partial copy of herself into the interface the moment Doom made contact, not with his permission, which he noted and filed for later consideration, but with the Chief's. And the Chief had made the decision in the half-second between Doom touching the console and the system responding, which meant the Spartan had been anticipating this moment and had prepared for it. Cortana's presence in the system was immediately visible to Doom's sensors as a secondary processing signature running parallel to his own. Faster than him in raw data throughput, as he'd assessed earlier, but narrower, her analysis focused on specific operational questions while his ranged across the entire architecture. The firing mechanism requires a physical index, Cortana said, her voice coming from everywhere in the chamber simultaneously now that she was distributed through the interface system. A specific Forerunner artifact, a containment device for the activation sequence. Without it, the ring can't fire. The index, the Chief said from behind Doom. And something in the Spartan's voice indicated this was not new information. Captain Keyes found it, Cortana said. The Covenant has it. Or, a pause, data processing in the background audible as a slight harmonic fluctuation in her voice. They had it. Keyes was taken. The Covenant retrieved the index from him before... She stopped. Doom did not press. He had enough context. The activation artifact was in Covenant hands, which meant it was either secured on a Covenant vessel or being transported toward this facility by a religious military that believed the ring's activation was the literal fulfillment of their civilization's divine purpose. He returned his attention to what the interface could tell him directly. The Forerunner operational logs were intact. 100,000 years of system records, compressed into data architectures that his armor's processing capacity was absorbing at maximum throughput, feeding him history at a rate that would have taken a human researcher centuries to process. The Flood's first containment breach on this installation. The Forerunner's response protocols. The decision, recorded with the flat, affectless precision of engineers documenting a catastrophic choice. To activate the ring rather than lose the Flood to the broader galaxy. And the cost. All neurologically complex life within 25,000 light years, every thinking being, every civilization, every mind. Sterilized with the comprehensive thoroughness of a weapon that did not distinguish between the infected and the uninfected, between the Flood and everything else. Because the Forerunners had determined that the only reliable containment was a galaxy wiped clean of everything the Flood could consume. Once the Forerunners had fired their own rings. And then they were gone, because they had been inside the range. Doom stood with this information for exactly 3 seconds. The weight of it, the terrible logic of it, the specific kind of courage or despair required to build a weapon of that scale, and then use it on yourself. He had faced choices of civilizational consequence before. He had made decisions that his universe's lesser minds called monstrous and he called necessary. But this was a different order of magnitude entirely. A mathematics of sacrifice that even his considerable capacity for ruthlessness found staggering. He was still processing it when the Gravemind arrived. Not combat forms, not infection vectors. The Gravemind itself, or rather, the physical manifestation of its central intelligence. The vast biological structure that the Flood built around its most critical processing nodes. the thing that had been growing in the facility's lowest level for 100,000 years on a diet of forerunner knowledge and patient geological time. It came through the control room's primary access corridor, which was 40 meters wide and 60 meters tall, and was still not quite large enough. The Gravemind's physical form compressed itself through the opening with the slow, inexorable movement of something that understood that time was on its side and had no reason to hurry. It was enormous. It was ancient. It smelled of 100,000 years of accumulated biology, of every organism it had ever absorbed, and it filled the control room with its presence the way a tide fills a bay. Completely, inevitably, and without particular malice, because malice implied caring about the things being submerged. "The index is coming," the Gravemind said, and its voice in the control room, with the Forerunner interface amplifying the biomass network's resonance, was a physical force. Doom's sensors registered the pressure wave, recalculated his force field's parameters, compensated. A Covenant zealot carries it to this place as we speak, believing he delivers the instrument of transcendence. He delivers the instrument of consumption. When the ring fires, every mind within range dies, and the flood inherits the silence. "The flood cannot consume the dead," Doom said. "No, but the flood survives, and the galaxy, emptied of competition, refills. Slowly, new life, new minds, new civilizations to consume." The Forerunners understood this. They chose to deny us rather than surrender to us. But denial is temporary. A pulse through the biomass nodes. "You understand this too. You have read their logs. You know that firing the ring does not end the flood. It delays us." "Yes," Doom said. "Then you understand that your only choices are absorption or delay." The Gravemind's physical form shifted, settling into the chamber with the patient permanence of something that intended to remain. "Join us and gain what no individual mind has ever held. The complete, accumulated knowledge of every civilization we have consumed, including the Forerunners themselves. Or watch the ring fire and delay us for another 100,000 years while every mind in this galaxy dies around you." The Chief moved up beside Doom, not in front, not intervening, but present, a statement in positioning rather than words. Whatever Doom decided, the Spartan was here. Fal Chavami's voice came through the comm from the northern corridor, where Johnson's position had held. "The Zealot is 4 minutes from the facility entrance. He has the index. 6 Phantoms in escort. 4 minutes." Doom looked at the Gravemind, looked at the interface, looked at the operational map of the ring displayed in Forerunner light above the central column. Every system, every process, every capability. His hands were still on the console. Cortana spoke quietly, from everywhere at once. "There's a third option," she said. "I've been running the Forerunner logs. The ring can be fired at reduced power. A localized pulse rather than a full galactic sterilization. Targeted, specific. And it would destroy this installation and everything on it. Collapse the flood's concentration here, and the shockwave would crack the ring's structural integrity enough to make it non-operational." A pause. "Everyone on the ring dies, but the galaxy lives, and the flood loses its largest active concentration in this system." The chamber was very quiet. "The machine will not allow partial activation," the Gravemind said. And there was something in the harmonics, something Doom's analysis engine flagged, reluctantly, as the closest approximation to uncertainty the flood's central intelligence had expressed since the conversation began. "We have read the Forerunner logs too." "You read them," Doom said, with the Forerunner's understanding. He looked at the interface. at the system architecture that his armor had been absorbing since the moment of contact, at the specific section of the operational framework that dealt with power distribution and firing parameters. The Forerunners had built the interface for themselves, which meant they had built in the assumption that its operators understood the system at a foundational level. They had not anticipated an operator who understood it differently, who approached the power distribution architecture not as a Forerunner engineer or a consumed intelligence, but as the greatest technological mind from a universe with different physical laws, bringing different assumptions to the same problem. "I read them," Doom said, "with mine." He reached inward one final time, one casting left. One significant expenditure of the reserves he'd been hoarding since the forest, since the scarab, since the display for Fowl's benefit that felt like days ago and had been hours. One application of mystic energy in a universe that offered nothing in return. A universe where every spell came from the finite reservoir of what he'd arrived with, drawn down section by section, hour by hour, until this last measure remained. He used it not as a weapon, not as a display. He used it as a key, a precise, sorcerous intervention at the interface's power distribution architecture, introducing a variable that the Forerunner engineers had not accounted for because it could not exist in their universe, modifying the firing parameter framework at a level below what the Gravemind's consumed Forerunner knowledge recognized as accessible. Now the interface changed. The holographic map above the central column shifted, firing parameters reconfiguring in real time, the system accepting the modification with the specific quality of a machine, encountering an input outside its design parameters, and adapting rather than rejecting. Because the Forerunners had built their systems to be robust, and robust systems adapted. The Gravemind understood what was happening in the same moment the interface accepted the change. Its physical form surged forward. The Chief stepped between it and Doom with a fragmentation grenade already armed. And Cortana did something from inside the interface that Doom had not predicted. She triggered every active Forerunner defense system in the control room simultaneously. Notice the walls erupting with automated Sentinel drones that had been dormant for 100,000 years and came online with the instant operational readiness of machines that did not age. Beams of hard light cut through the Gravemind's physical form, disrupting its structural coherence, buying seconds. Seconds were enough. Doom activated the modified sequence. The ring sang, a subsonic tone that moved through every surface simultaneously, through the Forerunner alloy and the biomass network and the bones of every living thing on the installation. And the Gravemind's form convulsed as the hard light intensified, and the interface column blazed white. And somewhere 4 minutes away, a Covenant zealot stopped moving as the escort phantoms suddenly lost power, their systems affected by the energy surge radiating outward from the control room through the ring's infrastructure. The index never reached the facility. The ring did not fire. That was the first thing, the most important thing. The fact that everything else arranged itself around like planets around a star. Installation 04 did not sterilize 25,000 light years of galaxy. The Gravemind did not inherit a silence of its own making. The Covenant zealot 4 minutes from the facility entrance did not complete his sacred journey. The index remained inert in hands that would never reach the console that needed it, because the console had been fundamentally altered by a man from another universe who had spent his last reserve of sorcery rewriting the assumptions built into a 100,000-year-old weapon system. What the ring did instead was localized. The modified sequence Doom had introduced propagated through Installation 04's infrastructure over the course of 11 minutes. 11 minutes during which the control room became the most contested piece of real estate in the known galaxy. Every faction on the ring converging on a signal that every sensor system detected as something unprecedented. The flood's biomass network convulsed as the ring's automated defense architecture came fully online for the first time in 100 millennia. Sentinel drones pouring from dormant bays throughout the facility in numbers that the Gravemind's combat forms could not match. The Gravemind's physical form fought with the desperate, purposeful violence of an intelligence that understood exactly what was happening and had calculated correctly that it could not stop it. But fought anyway, because a mind of that depth did not accept conclusions it found unacceptable without testing every remaining variable. The chief held the control room's entrance. This was not a metaphor or a simplification. The Spartan held a 40-meter corridor against successive waves of flood combat forms for 9 of those 11 minutes, with the focused, economical violence of a soldier who had been built for exactly this. Not the specific scenario, but the general condition of impossible odds, requiring sustained competence rather than inspiration. Shotgun, battle rifle, grenades deployed with the mathematical precision of someone who had long since stopped experiencing ammunition management as stress and processed it instead as arithmetic. Mjolnir's shields cycling down and back up, the armor's systems pushed to their operational limits and performing within them. Cortana feeding targeting data, shield status, flood movement patterns from her position distributed through the interface system. The partnership between Spartan and AI, operating at the frictionless efficiency it achieved when the stakes removed all unnecessary processing. Johnson held the northern corridor with 2 Marines and Fal Chavami. And what happened in that corridor over 9 minutes was the kind of fighting that sergeants don't write reports about, because reports require language, and some things resist language. Johnson emptied 4 magazines and his sidearm, and picked up a Covenant plasma rifle from a dead elite and emptied that too. 1 Marine died, quickly, which was the only mercy available in that corridor. He did the infection form reaching him in the gap between one burst of suppressing fire and the next. The other held because soldiers hold when the alternative is unthinkable, and Johnson made unthinkable very clear. Fal Chavami's energy sword ran dry. He kept fighting with a Forerunner hard-light weapon pulled from a Sentinel drone he destroyed with his hands because the sword was empty and the flood was not. And 60 years of martial mastery expressed itself in the adaptation with the specific fluency of a warrior for whom the implement was always secondary to the intent. Doom did not fight. Doom worked. The modified sequence required continuous management. The Forerunner system accepting his alterations in principle, but requiring constant correction as the ring's infrastructure adapted to instructions it had never been designed to receive. Each correction was purely technological, his armor's processing capacity running at maximum throughput, feeding adjustments into the interface faster than any organic mind could have managed them. No sorcery. His reserves were gone, not depleted to a dangerous level, not running on fumes, but gone, drawn to zero by that final casting, the last measure of mystic energy spent on the key that had opened the door to this approach. He was, for the first time since his arrival on this ring, operating purely as what his universe called a technological genius. It was, he found, sufficient. On the 11th minute, the sequence completed. The ring's localized pulse was not a firing in any sense the Forerunners had designed for. It was a system discharge. Every active energy conduit on Installation 04 releasing its stored power simultaneously in a directed burst that traveled through the ring's own infrastructure rather than outward into space. The flood's biomass network, threaded through the Forerunner facility's walls and conduits, was the primary recipient. The discharge moved through every surface the network touched. The energy incompatible with flood biology at a fundamental level, disrupting the neural connections that made individual masses of organic material into coordinated extensions of the Gravemind's intelligence. The Gravemind's physical form ceased coordinated movement, not destroyed. The flood was never simply destroyed. Its biology too redundant, too distributed, too fundamentally resistant to the concept of death that applied to individual organisms, but disconnected. The combat forms throughout the facility lost coherence as the coordinating intelligence that directed them was severed from its network, reverting to the basic infection behavior of organisms without strategic direction. Still dangerous, still functional as biological threats, but no longer the expression of a 10,000-year-old mind that had been planning this specific engagement since Doom refused its offer. The difference, in practical terms, was everything. Johnson's voice came through on the comm, rough with exertion and something that wasn't quite relief, but occupied the same space. Plus, whatever that was, it worked. Yes, Doom said. The flood? Disrupted, not eliminated. The installation's automated systems will manage the remainder. He looked at the interface, at the operational map still displayed above the central column. The ring's status, its systems, the cascading effects of the discharge propagating through its infrastructure in real time. The ring was damaged, not destroyed. The Forerunners had built with a permanence that a single discharge could not compromise. But the primary energy conduit network would require extensive repair before the ring was operational again, which meant the firing mechanism was non-functional on a timeline measured in centuries rather than hours. The index was irrelevant now. There was nothing to put it in. Cortana spoke from the interface with the quiet deliberateness of an intelligence that had been running a specific calculation for the last 11 minutes and had reached a conclusion she was not certain how to deliver. Doom. A pause. The discharge affected the ring's slip space manifold. The dimensional resonance in this system has been altered. There's a frequency in the interference pattern that my models identify as consistent with the energy signature you arrived with. Another pause. I think the ring opened a door. Doom looked up from the interface. A dimensional aperture, Cortana continued. Small, temporary, consistent with the resonance frequency of whatever pulled you here originally. It won't last. I estimate 40 minutes before the manifold interference dissipates and the frequency shifts beyond usable range. Her voice carried the specific quality of an AI delivering information it found simultaneously extraordinary and uncertain. If you want to go home, the window is now. The control room was quiet except for the distant sound of Sentinel drones managing the remaining flood presence in the facility's lower levels. The automated efficiency of a system doing what it had been built to do. 100,000 years late, better than nothing. The chief had come back from the corridor entrance and stood at a distance that communicated the particular respect of a soldier who had fought alongside someone and arrived at a specific assessment of their worth. Johnson was on the comm coordinating marine extraction, his voice carrying the exhausted professionalism of a man running on nothing but competence and stubbornness. Fal Chavami stood in the northern entrance, the hard light weapon still in his hand, his mandibles set in a configuration that Doom's behavioral analysis had no prior data point for. Something new, something the elite had not felt before this day, that his psychology was still in the process of naming. Doom looked at the interface one final time. The ring systems were his, not permanently, not completely, but for this moment the access was real, the data was real, and he had spent 11 minutes absorbing everything the Forerunner operational logs contained. The firing specifications, the containment protocols, the complete technical legacy of the most advanced civilization this universe had ever produced. It was compressed into his armor's memory banks with the comprehensive thoroughness of a man who understood that knowledge was the only currency that never depreciated. He had come to this universe through an accident. He was leaving through an understanding. Cortana, he said. Yes? The data you collected from the interface, your partial copy has it. Keep it. He removed his hands from the console. You will need it. A pause. Why are you telling me this? Because the Covenant still has ships in this system. The ring is damaged but not destroyed, and the flood is disrupted but not eliminated. He stepped back from the interface. You have a war to finish. The Forerunner data will help you finish it correctly. He turned to the chief, who had not moved, who was watching him with the patient attention of a soldier who had long since learned that the most important things were usually communicated in the moments before departure. You held the corridor, Doom said. Yes, the chief said. You are adequately competent, Doom said. And in his register, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The chief said nothing. But something in the Spartan's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, in the way of a being that had just received something it didn't expect and wasn't certain what to do with. Doom looked at Fal Chavami last. The elite had come here as a servant of a faith built on a lie. The great journey, a mistranslation of the Forerunner's final, desperate act of self-destruction. The rings were not instruments of transcendence, as they were the last resort of a civilization that had run out of better options. Everything the Covenant had built its 10,000 years of holy war on was a misreading of a suicide note. Your prophets, Doom said, will tell you the great journey continues. They will find another interpretation, another sacred text, another way to make the lie hold. He paused. Whether you allow them to is your choice, not mine. Fal's mandibles moved through the configuration Doom had no prior data for, and then settled into something his analysis engine tentatively labeled Resolve. Doom activated his repulsors and rose from the control room floor. The Doom armor system cycling to full operational readiness, the weapons array charging, the force field at maximum, and everything working exactly as it had when he arrived, because whatever this universe had thrown at him, whatever drain and disruption and accumulated consequence the day had produced, the armor held. It always held. He oriented toward the dimensional aperture Cortana had identified, 42 kilometers north of the facility, a tear in this universe's slip-space manifold that pulsed with the specific resonance frequency of home, his universe's physics, bleeding through the membrane like light under a door. The ring's artificial sky curved overhead as he accelerated through it. Installation 04 spreading beneath him in its impossible geometry, the engineered forest and the scarred terrain of a day's war visible below. The Covenant fleet moving in distant orbit, but the distant speck of what remained of the Pillar of Autumn still embedded in the ring's surface. A universe that had been, for one day, his battlefield. That had offered him the Flood's partnership and the Forerunner's legacy and a Spartan's reluctant respect and an elite's shattered faith and a sergeant's stubborn, uncomplicated competence. That had given him, in the end, exactly what he'd come for. Not the rings, not dominion over this universe's factions, not the Gravemind's accumulated knowledge or the Covenant's theological machinery or the UNSC's military infrastructure. Something more fundamental than any of those things. Understanding. The aperture was ahead, a shimmer in the space between stars, 30 seconds away. Victor Von Doom did not look back. In the aftermath of Installation 04, the universe exhaled. The Flood's disrupted presence in the facility's lower levels was systematically dismantled by Sentinel drones operating on protocols that had waited 100,000 years for authorization. Authorization that a man from another universe had inadvertently provided by touching the right console with the right hands. The Covenant fleet in orbit received fragmented reports from the Zealot, who never reached the control room. reports that described impossible things in the language of theological crisis. And the prophets who received those reports made the predictable decision. They suppressed them. The great journey continued. The lie held, for now. Fal Chavami filed no report at all. Cortana kept everything. The dimensional aperture closed 40 minutes after Doom passed through it. The slip space manifold settling back into the frequencies this universe recognized as normal, leaving no physical evidence that anything had crossed the boundary between realities. The Forerunner interface retained no record of the modification. Doom had ensured that before departing, because leaving fingerprints was for beings who expected to be followed. In Latveria, a laboratory lay in ruins, its dimensional equipment shattered beyond reconstruction. Victor von Doom returned to it through a membrane between universes, landing in the wreckage of his own experiment with the composure of a man who had left a destroyed laboratory and returned to a destroyed laboratory and found the symmetry acceptable. He sat in the ruins for a long time, not from exhaustion, from consideration. The Forerunner data in his armor's memory banks contained enough technological and strategic knowledge to fundamentally alter the trajectory of his universe's future. Knowledge extracted from a civilization that had faced an existential threat and made the hardest possible choice. And still lost eventually, because delay was not victory, and the flood was patient in the way that only truly ancient things could be patient. Doom understood patience. He began, in the quiet of his ruined laboratory, to build. What he built would not be a ring, would not be a weapon of galactic sterilization, would not be anything so crude as the Forerunner's final answer, which had been magnificent in its scale and tragic in its necessity. What Doom built with Forerunner principles filtered through his own incomparable synthesis of sorcery and science would be something this universe had never seen. A defense architecture, layered and redundant and built for permanence, oriented not around a single catastrophic solution, but around the systematic elimination of every pathway that led to catastrophe. Preparation, not reaction. Order, imposed before chaos, required it. The Forerunners had waited too long. Victor von Doom did not intend to make the same mistake. In a universe 25,000 light-years and one-dimensional boundary away, a Spartan stood in a damaged control room and looked at the space where an armored figure had been and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. Cortana's voice came quietly through the neural link. Not a tactical assessment, not a calculation, just 2 words, delivered with the specific quality of an intelligence that had encountered something it would be processing for a very long time. "Remarkable," she said. The chief looked at the Forerunner interface, still active, still displaying the ring systems in pale light. Looked at the data Doom had told Cortana to keep. Looked at the corridor he had held for 9 minutes against the flood, and the control room beyond it, where an impossible equation had been solved by a man who did not belong here and had left better prepared than he'd arrived. "Yeah," the chief said. Outside, Installation 04 continued its endless rotation, ancient and damaged and still standing, and the Forerunner light script on its walls encoding a history that now included one additional entry. Brief, anomalous, filed in the operational logs under a designation the system had generated automatically for an unclassified entity that had touched its interface and departed. The designation read, in Forerunner's script, as something that translated approximately as the one who rewrote the question.